We have lots to talk about in today's video, including the latest rumors around the league. Today's rumors focus on teams like Montreal, Columbus, on the Nashville Predators, Calgary Flames, and the Chicago Blackhawks. The Tampa Bay Lightning have new ownership. A big stake of the team has been sold. Plus, we have a big update in Toronto. They're activating goalie Joseph Woll. Brett Pesce and Luke Hughes return from New Jersey. Some other updates from other teams as well regarding injuries, including Anthony Duclair. Some rumors around some players who might be in contention for Four Nation face-off roster spots, news from the waiver wire, and a whole lot more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about today. A very busy NHL news cycle day. First up, let's start with news from the NHL waiver wire. Yesterday, the Tampa Bay Lightning have placed forward Connor Shea and his $2 million contract on waivers. He did, in fact, clear, as I suspected yesterday, with him having the extra year on his contract and obviously struggling a bit with his production lately. Makes sense that he wasn't picked up. So the Lightning have now assigned him to the American Hockey League. So he will go down. Will clear a little bit of salary cap space for them. And today on waivers, we have the New York Rangers placing veteran defenseman Chad Rubeedle. So another veteran out there on waivers for the claiming if another team wants to do so here today. Of course, today is going to be a big night, of course, for those in Canada. I think part of it is available in the States too, I have not mistaken, through the Amazon Prime production. We have Coast to Coast tonight, so lots of opportunities to be able to watch a variety of games and get bits and pieces. So I recommend you check that out. One of the more interesting games on the schedule tonight is the Minnesota Wild visiting the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's Marc-Andre Fleury's final game in Pittsburgh. Of course, we know the longtime Penguin netminder, likely going to be a Hall of Famer. I'm sure the Penguins will likely even consider, I would think they'd consider retiring his number, putting him into their own local Hall of Fame or whatever they do for their recognition there. But, has had a remarkable career, first overall pick, multiple Stanley Cups, lots of great things that he's done in his career. Unfortunately, he's we already knew this was going to be his final run around the NHL this year. So final game in Pittsburgh. They have some special stuff on the go tonight. They do intend to likely acknowledge and honor him, but they do have some special shirts and jerseys for sale. I'll show you a quick graphic here on the screen. Of course, unless you're there locally, you probably won't have much of a chance to make a purchase, but they're available in the Penn's Gear store at the arena. As I mentioned, we have a sale involving the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, owner Jeff Vinik is still the majority owner for the time being, but we don't know the exact percentage, but a portion of the team has been sold. But in 3 years' time, he will become the minority owner. The new owners will take over the majority stake. So he's selling a portion of the team to Doug Ostervert and Mark Lipschult. Of course, not people I'm overly familiar with, but Vinik retains full control, like I said, for the next 3 years before transferring that over to those guys. No changes to hockey operations department or anything of that nature. The team valuation for the purpose of the sale, they're valued at $1.8 billion. So that's pretty substantial considering Vinik bought the team for $93 million. That's an $825 million return on investment, assuming that it's just because we were told it's just over 50% to be the majority owners. So even at 51%, he makes $825 million. If it's a bigger percentage than that, then it's even more. That's a substantial investment that he's cashing out on here. And I suspect you're going to see a bunch of other NHL owners either sell a minority stake or possibly even get out of being the majority owner themselves, considering how we've seen franchise valuations explode in the last number of years here. So when you think about that, and you think about where the salary cap is and how player salaries haven't really grown under the salary cap era, it certainly seems like it's not quite fair when you look at it from that perspective at all. A bunch of injury updates and roster moves around the NHL as well. The Toronto Maple Leafs today confirmed that they're activating goaltender Joseph Woll, who's been on injury reserve since the beginning of the season. Woll, I believe, was supposed to make the opening night start. Ended up having some tightness or something. I'm not sure if it was groin related or what, something along those lines, and ended up out ever since. Of course, Toronto Maple Leafs will play the St. Louis Blues tonight. Of course, it'll be the first time that we see head coach Craig Berube coach against his former club, where he won the Stanley Cup with, of course, in St. Louis. So certainly going to be a big game for him. Woll does get the start tonight. Max Pacioretty, after their game in Columbus, did injure something. We don't know exactly. They haven't given him much detail, but he is considered day-to-day. He did leave that Columbus game a bit early and didn't return. So that's your update with Toronto. New Jersey is activating Brett Pesce and Luke Hughes. They're both ready to rock and ready to return, so that's phenomenal for New Jersey, who's already got a pretty decent start to the year and a good record, and to throw two really solid defensemen in their lineup like that, just going to make them even better. So great news there in New Jersey. The Islanders have updated us on Anthony Duclair. All we had heard previously was from GM Lou Lamoriello saying that it was going to be a longer-term issue. They were, I guess, at that point a few days ago, confident that it wouldn't be season ending, but it may be sometime before Duclair returns. Today they've updated things to say 4 to 6 weeks. So based on the original comments and prognosis, I think 4 to 6 weeks sounds a lot better and a lot shorter than a lot of people were expecting. It's still a longer-term injury, which just certainly doesn't help the Islanders, who brought in Duclair to add some speed, skill, and scoring ability to their lineup, which they've struggled with so far. They've been shut out in half of the opportunities to play their games this year. Like, they're not scoring enough, which is like the story here that's been following them around for quite some time. But thinking of Duclair being out several months instead of 4 to 6 weeks is a much more daunting task. So obviously that's a little bit better than what it could have been. So that's somewhat positive. Vegas is expected to get William Karlsson back. He's expected to make his season debut this weekend when they battle Ottawa. And speaking of Ottawa, Shane Pinto apparently, I'm not sure. We know there's something been going on with him. He's battling some sort of injury. Hasn't caused him to miss any time as of yet, but he has been missing some morning skates and practices. They've been letting him have some maintenance time to deal with that. Apparently he's a game time decision, so I'm not quite sure exactly what is ailing Pinto at this point, but he may or may not be available to play this weekend. So we'll see. Their road trip continues. They played the first game against Utah the other night. They've had a couple of days off for some team building, and then they go in to play Vegas and then the Avalanche before they head back to Ottawa. Now, some other news and notes around the NHL. We have a significant signing to announce. Vegas Golden Knights have extended defenseman Shea Theodore on a 7-year contract at $7.425 million. I'm a little surprised here, to be completely honest. When they brought in Noah Hannafin and they signed him to a long-term deal not long after, I kind of thought maybe he might be the Theodore replacement. Obviously, by keeping both, they're a stronger decor and a stronger team. But looking at their commitments contract-wise and where things are at with their salary cap, I do wonder what this will mean for the club. It's great news. It does take one of the more interesting D guys off the market that were a pending UFA. Looking at the list of the top 10 to 20 players, he would have been one of the more sought-after defensemen for sure had he made it to market next offseason, but clearly that's not going to be the case. Obviously, Theodore and Hannafin will patrol the left side of their decor here for the next number of years. They still have Pietrangelo under contract for 2 more years after the current one. I wonder what this means for a guy like Braden McNabb. If you look at their lefties and righties on the blue line, certainly, like I said, you've got Theodore, you get Hannafin, Petro, all multiple years on their contracts. You get Haig and Whitecloud. McNabb's a pending UFA too. I mean, he's been there since the original season, so I do wonder if maybe, and he's the oldest of the bunch, either he signs for cheap or maybe he doesn't come back. I don't know, but either way, at this point, their main defenseman, Theodore, who's worth every penny in my opinion. He's a great skating, offensive-minded defenseman, good size as well. I think this is a great deal for the Golden Knights. The other thing, if you look at between what they have with all their commitments for next year, though, that gives them about just over $70 million in contracts. Now, we know the salary cap is going to go up. It's expected to rise another 5%. But, $70 million seems like, there's lots of room there. Sure. But the only thing is they don't have any goalies signed for next year. So Adin Hill and Samsonov are both pending UFAs. And on top of that, they only have 7 forwards signed. So let's say McNabb, who's a pending UFA, he doesn't return. For example, you still on the back end have, besides the 4 guys I mentioned with Theodore, Hannafin, Petro, and Whitecloud, you still got a Haig as well. Then they have Ben Hutton and Caden Korczak already under contract too. So they have technically enough D if they needed to go with that. But Hill and Samsonov are not signed. I suspect Hill has a good chance of getting a fairly good bump in pay and longer term extension, I would think. We'll see what Samsonov does this year. But they only have 7 forwards signed. So out of the remaining money, I mean, Hill's going to probably get a decent chunk. And then after that, you've got, you're probably looking at about 5 at least 5 or 6 other players. So it doesn't leave a lot of money when you add it all up. So they're certainly well within their right position here to be able to handle the Theodore extension. I just wondered if they might take a different route, but clearly this was the way to go and keep him in the organization if they can certainly handle it. On the trade rumor front, lots of teams to take a look at today. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about Montreal, Utah, Calgary, Chicago, Nashville as well. Some of this comes from Pierre LeBrun, who did a insider trading segment on TSN earlier this morning, talking a bit about Utah. Utah, of course, we know right now is decimated on the blue line with the top 2 righties, with obviously John Marino and, of course, Sean Durzi, both out for, 4 months at the minimum apiece, if not, 6 months for Durzi. So clearly, we know that Utah wants to win this year. They want to have a big year of progress. For right now, they've called up Maverick Lamoureux, who could be, we'll see how he does. Long term, they're hoping he'll be a piece there on the blue line, but he's, I think, got some work to do to be a regular NHL defenseman for sure. But like I said before, talking about these injuries, I would not be surprised to see the team be aggressive. And they've certainly done so. According to Pierre LeBrun, GM Bill Armstrong has already been on the phones. One name that he has checked in on is Ivan Provorov in Columbus. And apparently, according to some other Columbus reporters, they are not the only team to be calling Columbus about Ivan Provorov. He's gotten a decent amount of interest from other clubs so far. What Pierre has basically said is, Columbus has had a decent start to the season. I don't think they're, delusional by any means and think they're something they're not, but they may not be ready to move him just yet. Clearly, this team has been through a lot emotionally. They have some veterans that they know are likely going to get moved this year because they're not expected to be in contention for playoffs, but they do need to insulate their younger players, and they want to create a good environment, of course, and have everything be competitive as possible. And even though some of these guys will almost definitely be moved before the trade deadline, it's so early that they don't necessarily want to move players just yet. So, hard to say when they'll be interested. Of course, the offers can talk for themselves sometimes. You make an offer they can't refuse. They may not have a choice but to pull the trigger. But certainly Utah definitely exploring the market to add on the blue line to replace their injured D, which should not come at anybody's surprise. No guarantee, of course, it's going to be Provorov. He is not necessarily the main kind of defenseman that comes to mind, but he would certainly be a decent option. Now, I know LeBron brought up the idea of Timothy Liljegren in Toronto and suggested that he may not be as big of a target for them because he's signed for more than just the season. A pending UFA, like a rental player, might be more attractive to Utah because Durzi and Marino will both be back. It's not like they're gone forever, and they both have longer-term contracts associated with them. So to have somebody who that can basically be a fill-in for the next several months while they're recovering and then probably not come back as a UFA would be your ideal kind of player here. So we'll see if they continue to pursue Ivan Provorov in Columbus, and they'll be, I'm sure, looking at some other options there, of course, as well. One name that was mentioned by Elliotte Friedman as a player that the Utah team might move, and this could be used in conjunction with getting a defenseman, if not something different, but Michael Carcioni, who ended up being a 20-goal scorer with the Coyotes last season, hasn't really gotten off to a good start this year, and kind of, the roster's a lot deeper than it used to be, so they certainly have a lot more options within the forward group. He's not getting the playing time and, the consistent being in the lineup, and he apparently does seem like a player that he feels that Utah could very well use as a trade piece in order to, make some other acquisitions, especially it seems like their main target would be to replenish on the blue line if they want to go out and do such things. Now, as I mentioned as well, Friedman also in his latest 32 Thoughts blog talks a bit about some other teams that all want to be going after the same sort of thing. We talked yesterday about how the Canadiens and the Flames might be good trade partners, given that the Flames are looking for centers, and they're not the only ones. According to Friedman, the reports out of Nashville indicate that the Predators are looking for centers, as well as the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, in Nashville, we know they started 0-5. They finally got a win. They've had to use a player such as like Colton Sissons at times on their second line center role, and that's not really where he properly slots into the lineup. So certainly Trotz is not afraid to make it known that that is an area that he would like to be trying to upgrade right now. But he also mentioned in his comments that teams are not really trading right now. There's things like, a lot of teams right now. That's why you don't, the first month or 6, 7, 8 weeks of the season, you don't typically see a lot. It's usually probably into mid to late November before you see sometimes a little bit, then you'll get the odd one. Obviously throughout the season, you're going to get, kind of pieces here and there, and then the big, flurry closer to the deadline. But in the case of Barry Trotz, he said basically nobody's really willing to make deals right now. They're still kind of evaluating themselves what they have before they'll get to that point, right? Most teams have only played, some have played 7, 8 games. Some are still only at 4 or 5. So they're still obviously scheduled to get caught up on here. So Nashville, like I said, looking for that number 2 center role. They brought in lots of offense, but a lot of their top scorers are all in the wing. Besides O'Reilly, they could use another centerman there to really kind of solidify things. Like I said, Calgary's in the same boat. We talked yesterday, like I said, about the potential of would Doc be a good fit if Montreal does decide to move him. I think it's early. The Habs are going to be patient there. But there's certainly lots of other players around the league that could be potential targets. We know Calgary, for the right player who can stay for a long time and be effective, might be willing to give up a first-round pick. And the Chicago Blackhawks, it's funny because obviously they traded Kirby Dach a couple of years ago, and now they're already back into a market, again, looking for some centers, preferably somebody's on the younger side of things, and that can be with the club for an extended time. Young centers, especially right shot centers, seem to be at a premium right now. Lots of teams are scouring the market, trying to find that fit. So Nashville, Calgary, Chicago, all very much in the same sort of kind of predicament here. They could very well be in the market for the same guys. Now, I don't see Chicago trying to bring back Kirby Dach, and I'm not even certain at this point Montreal would move him. We just talked yesterday about the fact that things haven't really worked out for him during his time in Montreal, considering he was brought in to be the number 2 center and has battled a lot of injuries and inconsistent play. And I do wonder how the team kind of feels about him on a long-term basis. If they had a great deal for an upgrade in other areas, I do wonder if they would consider moving him. But again, I think they want to be patient there and make sure it's the right deal, the right time for the club. But speaking of Montreal, Pierre LeBrun and his TSN segment this morning did talk about Montreal, and he did say that Ken Hughes, the GM of the Habs, is definitely working the phones. And he mentioned how the Canadiens were a team that, a lot of the fan base seems to be getting antsier than they are internally. I know a lot of people thought, okay, they've been rebuilding for about 3 years. We need to see, at least even if they don't make the playoffs, they have to be in the race longer. They have to play more meaningful games. They have to see some progress this year, or it's going to be taking a step back and the rebuild might be failing. And like I said, the fans were very much embracing it in the beginning, but now it seems like patience are starting to wear a little bit thin. But LeBrun was saying internally, they didn't really seem to think playoffs were really a realistic thing. They do want to see progress, and they definitely would like to be playing more meaningful games later into the campaign, but I don't think they were, they didn't have a delusional, view of where things were at. Like I said before, as much as they would have a potentially better team and be stronger this year, there's a lot of teams to jump over in the standings, and who's coming out that made it last year is the big question, right? So it's not like you can't take some positives away and say the team got better, but it still didn't get in. But progress is definitely something they're looking for. But Ken Hughes, I think, is at this point acknowledging that they didn't have a great start. They've started better in recent years than they have this year. And I think there is some concern kind of slowly building that if they don't get things kind of righted a little bit here soon, that they may not be able to make progress, even though the playoffs may not have been a realistic option for them this year and a realistic target for them internally. Like I said, I'm sure they want to get better and they want to improve and they want to play more meaningful games later in the year. There is no doubt. But it seems like the Habs the conversations from what LeBrun was saying are not necessarily fixated on one specific thing. It seems like they're kind of focused on maybe shaking things up. So I'm not going to say that they're probably attacking the core or anything of that nature. But like we've talked about before, some of the other pieces that people have kind of raised questions about. They have a lot of defensemen. As much as they like Arbor-Xhekaj, would they consider it? He's he can throw punches and he can fight, but he's not. He's got work to do defensively. He's still a little bit of a liability at times, which is why he hasn't been in the lineup all the time. I wonder about Doc. I wonder about some of the vets like Armia, Dvorak. What kind of shakeup is Ken Hughes looking for? You have to think it could be a bit of everything, including like somebody who could come in and mix with that core group of guys to be with the team on a longer term basis. Definitely something interesting for sure. Lots of conversations are happening, and probably going to be a little bit before we get a lot of activity though. But at the end of the day, teams are, you notice a lot of these teams were, outside of maybe Nashville, were very, like Chicago, Montreal, Utah, they were all very low in the standings last year and trying to work their way up. And it's as much as they are being patient, starting to run just a little bit thin. So we'll see what happens. Should be an interesting few weeks as these teams kind of chase some players around the league, and we'll see what the rumors tell us on what might be happening. So let me know your thoughts on all today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I will catch you next time.